Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Billy Dees, and I'm absolutely thrilled that you are here. We are primarily an interview and a commentary podcast, and today we have an interview for you. And on the studio line with me today is Rachel Pfennig Hales. How are you doing, Rachel?
Hi. Oh, I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, it's great to have you here. You're very welcome, and thank you for being here. Interesting book, and we're going to get to that. Her first full-length publication is called Tour Book, and it just came out last year in April, I believe. Rachel has a Bachelor of Arts from DePauw University, a Master's of Arts. I should say Master of Arts. Technically, that's the way you're supposed to say it, I believe. A Master of Arts in English Studies from National University, and a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction from Goucher College. Rachel has a fondness for nonfiction stories of growth, and she and I both share that. And she likes those stories to offer a unique voice or perspective. Rachel has 3 young children and a husband who also works in the live event industry, and we're going to be talking about that. They have a giant silly dog, and while they have built their home in Pennsylvania, she professes to always be from Chicago. All right. Well, first things first, what is your dog's name?
Well, especially because she is very excited, obviously, to be talking to you also, Billy. I'm hearing her in the background. That's Astrid. She is 100 pounds of just like dopey, loving goodness, but she is 100 pounds and huge and just thinks she's a lap dog and wants to be loved all the time. But she is out there and you might hear her barking occasionally.
All right. That's all right. We're glad to have her on the program. You grew up in Chicago.
I did, in the suburbs of Chicago. So I'm not I need to be very clear about that. Total suburban upbringing for sure. But I do love that area. And I don't know, even no matter how many different places I live, you have to root for the Cubs. You've got to love a good Portillo's hot dog, even as a vegetarian, right? They just need the veggie option. You got to root for the Bears. And, it's where I'm from, and I do really love that.
I'm kind of from the Cleveland area, so I'm a Browns fan, and the Browns did beat Chicago.
Yes,
but you guys have the Ohio State quarterback, so
you have to cheer a little bit, right?
Yeah, we certainly want him to do well. Yes. What were your early days like?
Gosh, you couldn't tell by the intro. My goodness, hearing it back to me, wow, I sound like a nerd, but I've been I guess the interests I have now as an adult, I feel fortunate, have grown from the interests I really had as a kid. I love to read. I love to do theater. I love to be in shows and performances and productions.
Yeah.
I was that kid, right? Community theater, school theater. I was the captain of the speech team in high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very big news. It was, it was just fun. Any kind of chance I had to be with a group of my friends performing and being part of a production was really fun to me. And I feel really fortunate that that's still what I get to do as a grown-up. That is still my full-time job, is getting to be a part of building these big shows and being on crews and productions that build these large-scale live events that people get to enjoy. And of course, there are some ways that it's so different from how it was as a kid, but really not too, It's still the theater lover in me that gets such a kick out of what we do. And so I do, I feel fortunate. I got a lot of that as a kid. I got a lot of opportunities to try different things. And I appreciate that so much because I still get to do that.
It's very noticeable. You light up when you talk about the theater, and in your younger days, to give us kind of like a backdrop, what was so intriguing about the theater? Did you just love being on stage? Was it the idea of being a star, or affecting emotions in the audience, or what would be your draw to it?
Yeah, that's such a good question. As I was growing up, I was definitely on stage more. I really did love to perform, and even still now, we joked when you and I were talking that I'll be a talker, and someone's like, "Hey, you want to share about this?" I am a sharer. I like to be able to connect with people in that way, um, and so for me, it was fun. If it was, I was never quite a singer, but like, hey, I was in the show choir and we were dancing, and it was any kind of performance was great, and I did get to be in a lot of shows in high school and then in
Hmm.
college. But in college, I also started transitioning more towards backstage and seeing what went in behind the scenes. And then actually got to do a lot of work in the TV production studios in
Mm.
college. And I realized how similar that connection of what I did in the theater. I did my first community theater show when I was 7. I was a bunny in Winnie the Pooh, not
Oh,
the bunny, but like a bunny. I
a
had like
bunny.
4
Okay.
lines. Yeah, like 4
Hmm.
lines. And oh my God, I was sold. Like curtain call, I was like, oh, this is so fun. And looking back, like, you work for months and we had one weekend of shows, right? We rehearsed
Yeah.
for like 3 months and we did 3 shows. But those 3 nights felt so satisfying, right? We had put so much
Sure.
effort into the costumes and the scenery and all of us learning our lines and knowing the flow of the show. Even
Hmm.
as a kid, that felt really gratifying to see that kind of final picture at the end, see people
Yeah.
enjoying that. Um, and the timelines are a little different in professional events.
Of
We're
course. Sure.
doing several shows a week, maybe, but
Hmm.
it's still a bunch of different people, a bunch of different crews, a bunch of different individual teams coming together
Yeah.
to create this sort of seamless picture that the audience can enjoy. And, they don't have to think about all the work that goes into it. They just get to have fun. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. You described yourself as a writer turned roadie and then back. Um, Tell us a little bit about that journey. I presume, obviously, you said right from the beginning you enjoy writing and all that. So I'm guessing that from there, when you found the similarity of the road life to theater, it was kind of a natural transition to kind of move into that and then write about it.
It was, yeah, I loved doing theater and that has always been my thing. But I think early on as a kid in my head, you could either have a career as like a Broadway star or you'd be this starving artist with
Yeah.
nothing else to do. And so, or at least I feel like that's how the arts had been sort of introduced to me. And so in the back of my head, I was like, well, I'm not good enough to be like the Broadway star. So
Hmm.
like this is just my hobby. And so I really through school, I really loved English and I really loved expressing myself in writing. And so that
Hmm.
was sort of my goal. I thought was my goal at
Hmm.
first. And then as I started experiencing ways like, oh, playing around in the TV station in college, I'm like, oh,
Sure.
I do see different sort of career paths that this could lead to. Like, let's explore
Hmm.
this a little bit more. Um, and so when I graduated college, I had an opportunity and I had found a job at So You Think You Can Dance
Mm.
for a summer. It was like 3 months, but I was like, well, let's give it a shot. I had always, this is in the line of the theater. I'll always have this other stuff to fall back on.
Yeah.
And sort of right place, right time, I came in touch through that show. Within like 2 months, I ended up meeting a crew that was getting ready to go on tour. I met the crew of the Black Eyed Peas. They were getting ready. I'd Got a Feeling had just come out.
Okay.
They were getting ready to go on this big world tour and they were hiring and I clicked with their crew and the production manager asked if I wanted to go on tour. Gosh, I had no idea what that meant. I was not ready for that job. I was so underqualified, but
Hmm.
I guess I did know a little more than I was expecting because of all that background from like, oh, there are similarities. You at least know the idea of being around a stage or understand how to deal with some of the moving parts and the gear. But my goodness, then I was pulled right into this completely separate path for myself that I had
Sure.
never set out for. And so I feel so grateful for that. I was pulled backstage on these giant live concerts. And I think it's an industry that not a lot of people know about or consider. You know, the backstage world, the crew and tech world, the live event industry world, we're doing our jobs really well if nobody thinks about us doing our jobs, right? So many people have been to concerts and you walk in and the doors are open and the lights are down and the stage is there and it's set.
Yeah.
And the lights drop and the band's there and it's a great time. You know, you get your babysitter, you buy your tickets in advance, you plan your night, and then you leave.
Yeah.
And I guess first tour especially, I just couldn't get over how many people, how much work, how much coordination goes into getting that one show ready for opening. You know, you get there at 5 or 6 in the morning to a completely empty arena floor. And every piece comes off the truck. Every piece is built. The stage, the lights, the audio, the pyrotechnics, you know, all of these different pieces. There's dozens of people there pitching in, plus the local people that are from the venue itself. So just all of these different teams come together. And if we're doing our job right, people walk in and never think about all those people. But those people are who I found most fascinating. Yeah. You know, this whole community of show people. We're going to get the show done one way or the other. And I fell in love with the community.
Yeah. I'll ask you, it's been a long time since I was directly involved in anything involving a concert. My background is more like radio and media and things like that. But my understanding is very rarely does the band itself have anything, I shouldn't say they have nothing to do with it because that's not true, but the sound and all the accompaniments, obviously they work with the band on what they want, but those are done by companies that specialize in live events. Is that basically true?
Yeah. So when you come in to see the concert, the band surrounds themselves with a strong production to be able to make sure that all these different parts of the show come together.
Yeah.
But the job of the band is to show up a little bit before doors, usually, get ready to play, walk on stage and have a great concert, right? Other parts of their job might include press in the city or rehearsals elsewhere, you know, things that they have to do for themselves. Sure. But when it comes to the show, the production takes care of it. So you have a team of people that help source the different elements for what you need. So you might have an artist that comes in with an idea like, I want a giant flying dragon, right? To ride in on a giant flying dragon while I'm singing. Okay. And that's usually about what you'll get, like a directive. And then it goes through this whole chain of people, right? Because you have to have the designer to kind of think through, okay, what should that look like? Then you need to source the vendors to say, okay, who's going to build this structure? How are we going to get it as close to this aesthetic picture as possible? Oh, but then it has to move safely through the air. Yeah. And to do that, it has to hang from the grid and the rafters in this building. And you have to pay attention to the weight load and the mechanics and the programming for how that thing moves. Oh, but hey, you also need the spotlight to be able to follow it and the lighting cues that go around making that dragon look different colors. And they're singing. So there's the in-ears that the artist hears themselves in their ears. And then there's the microphone so that the audience can hear and all the levels of how to make that sound great as they move, right? And then there's fire to make it splash. And that's the pyrotechnics team. And so as you piece this together, you know, you might come to a company and say, I need your help to build the show. Well, you're going to go to an audio company and they're going to take care of all the pieces of the audio for that entire concert, right? Yeah. You're going to have someone who's building the set and the props and the pieces. You're going to have individual teams that come together to pay attention to the wardrobe, right? So into that one gag on tour, you might have, you know, several dozen people who have touched that piece along the way. And the technology of it has grown. You know, as soon as one artist has a giant flying dragon, the next artist needs 3, you know, that spin around and spitfire. So it's a really innovative and technical industry that has so many creative components that are there to support the artist who then does the actual performance.
When something like that is conjured up, especially when it's done late in the planning stages. I would guess, and here's kind of the worry wart coming out of me. I would have to think that something like a flying dragon that goes over the audience is going to impact your liability insurance.
You sound like my husband.
Because if that lands on somebody's head, you know.
Well, that's the thing, is that you have these companies who specialize in automation, who specialize in engineering. So while you have the theater kids in us, right, who come to this industry, you also have engineers. You also have software and computer programmers.
Sure.
You also have all of these different safety precautions that go in to making sure that stuff doesn't fall down on your head.
Yeah.
But hey, you want to know a secret? When you go to a concert, pretty much everything is hanging from right above your head.
Yeah, sure.
These concerts, right? They weigh 200,000 pounds, 250,000 pounds. But there's a whole team of riggers who figure out the math for how that's safely hung in the ceiling in every venue. And then they actually put harnesses on and climb out there into the ceiling and hang these motors that then hold the whole show up.
Yeah.
And I guess I loved the riggers right off the bat, because that to me seemed so cool. I'm like, that's your job? And they're like, yeah, it's geometry and math, and it's climbing. Like, they put their harnesses on and they're climbing out there. But there is a lot of liability in that, because
even for the artist,
because
safely. There's been a number of times. What was it? From the Foo Fighters, Grohl, he broke his leg right during a performance. You know, and hey, you know, that's the guy that's making the money. And when you've invested in a tour and you got sponsors and everything, and something like that happens, you know, that can be a tough spot, I would guess.
Oh, so, it's definitely something that has the industry at large is actually pretty well. On the one hand, it's one of the oldest kind of industries in human existence, right? The troubadours and the storytellers and the folklore. But the way we're talking about it specifically with concert touring, the first gear went on tour in the late 60s. A lot of those people who started out the touring industry, literally the foundational individuals who got it started and off the road, some of them are even still working, or they're just starting to retire. Collectively, we're a really young industry, and the growth in the last 50 years has been, you know, it's amazing to think, right? When in the 60s, right, in the early 70s, it was completely normal for someone like Led Zeppelin to show up and play a community center or a gymnasium, or a college auditorium, and they'd play with whatever gear
they had
was available at that location.
Yeah.
But then as they started figuring out that you can take this really technical, delicate gear and package it up and move with it, and then you can control the way your show sounds because it's your sound gear.
Yeah.
Control the way your show looks because it's your lighting.
Yeah.
And really, that part got started when it was a group of people hopping in a van being like, hey, we need someone to drive this van. Like, who can drive this van? And, you know, everyone jokes sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But it started out as like, hey, we want to try this. Who's willing to give it a shot?
Yeah.
And from there, it was like, okay, well, now that we're out and we have these lights and this, you know, speaker system, we need a place to stand. So let's create a way to do the stage. And, you know, the industry grew out of innovation and out of problem solving.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you go back to the history of it. I'm a little bit more familiar with what happened in the studios during the 1950s, in particular in the 60s. And quite frankly, record executives did not take rock and roll seriously. So the best engineers, the best recording guys were with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and all these other people. And even on tour, I mean, some of the sound systems were very crude. Even the early Beatles concerts were almost, the audience could not hear them. So it's amazing to me that when you think about some of the great artists of the 1950s, some of the best innovative artists of all time were recorded as crudely as the band's over there, and they pointed a microphone. The whole band.
Like, it's fine.
Yeah, and sound was done very similarly. They just daisy chained a bunch of amplifiers together, and it's amazing how the 1970s. I think there was a huge leap from the 1960s to the 70s. My guess is a huge leap in terms of how that was processed, astronomical leap. And of course, now as technology has evolved, it's gotten more mobile, more compact, more easy to set up. You can retain your EQ settings for different venues and all these other things. And so that makes it a lot better. But the evolution of it, when the record companies started to take rock seriously, they changed everything because rock musicians, quite frankly, blew a lot of stuff up. So they so they had to make
Not
equipment
wrong. You're not wrong.
and the companies had to come up with ways to make this a feasible thing for these types of performances to happen. So that's an interesting thing. That's something I've been, a fan of. I like the evolution of things in general, multi-track recording and Les Paul and all these other things. So,
Well, it's really amazing to see then like what drives that, because as you keep figuring out what you can do and what you can't do, I would say that this is an industry of these problem solvers and of these innovators. And so, as you keep getting the challenge to make it bigger or better or more efficient, or because then it also needs to travel, right?
yeah,
It's not just the look of the show like you would put in on a big theater and leave there. Every morning, 3, 4, 5 times a week, you're unpacking everything off of the back of a truck
yeah.
and building it new. And at the end of the night, repacking it and putting it back in the truck and going to the next city. And so it needs to have a real efficiency to it too, which is something I've actually over time, I think it's something I really come to appreciate about the
hmm
industry the most, is just like people really are looking to continue improving, continue
Yeah.
beating their last show or improving on their last gig or making it sound better or look better and making that easier to accomplish. And that to me is really inspiring. And I really, to me, connected with the community. And that's kind of where I found the niche. Like I admire that so much in this industry.
As an artist yourself, and when you're helping artists present, most of them being, let's say, bands which are very sound oriented and skill in terms of your ability to sing, play instruments, and all these other things. Is there ever a time when they get carried away to the point where a lot of the lighting and the explosions and all these other things are either taking the place or they're becoming too much of a distraction to the music?
I think that is a really interesting question. Sometimes in how we discuss what we do is we do what it has grown to be is almost more than just a concert, right?
Yeah,
A concert could be a club, a concert can be a theater, a concert could just be a set, like an acoustic set, right?
sure.
But when we're talking about this kind of larger level show and performance, they're more, sometimes we use the word spectaculars, right? It's more about the production at large, where you go
hmm
to see more than just the musician. Yes, it's the name on the marquee, but you do come to expect some wow to it,
hmm
right? You come to expect to be entertained in a way that's more than just a concert.
Sure.
Because I think, there's still plenty of places to go and see just a concert, right?
Sure.
Where I would say could be your instruments and your audio, maybe lighting, like
Yeah.
maybe
Sure.
audio, depends. You could be in a coffee shop and enjoy a concert. Um, I think the level of what I get to work around a lot are these bigger productions where
hmm
really the intention is to go and see something where you do get the wow and the zazz and all of it. You get the video and the
Sure.
lights and the lasers, and it's an immersive experience in a different way.
Yeah. You talk about marketing live events, and obviously you got some experience doing that. And now you're marketing your book called Tour Book.
I
Um,
am.
how has those experiences helped each other? How have you been able to benefit from that?
Yeah, so I feel fortunate. I work at a really unique live event in a very unique live event community where I part of my job is getting to create the messaging, um, for that community. But then a lot of my job is also really getting to engage with individual live event professionals. We do trainings and sort of team development programs. We do educational outreach where we get to, I joke all the time, like teach people about live events. And I love that part of my job because I feel like as I've been able to grow in my job there is really as I've been trying to learn about it myself.
Sure.
I was that theater kid. I was looking for opportunities in the arts or careers in the arts. And I didn't feel like it was very well communicated to me that there were so many legitimate careers, right? That you have different pathways there and available. And I was just kind of astounded by this beautiful community of people who travel together and build things. So right from the start, right from my first tour, I was asking questions from everybody. But that's why I say I've always been the writer. I've always been very curious that way. And so right from the start, I was so overwhelmed by like, this is a very new environment, right? We're traveling so fast. We're not getting a ton of sleep. We're having these like kind of fast show deadlines.
Yeah.
And there are so many people that are thriving in this and getting to learn from them. I spent my year just asking 1,000 questions and writing everything down and basically never stopped. And from there, it grew to be able for me to become a job where I do get to help ask questions of the community and find out what they're interested in. What are our challenges? How can we be better? How can we be more aware of our safety? So maybe it's getting, more people lift certified and more people OSHA certified and more people CPR and first aid certified or mental health certified, right? Like, okay, how can we be better leaders for each other, right? With leadership development and conflict resolution and that sort of thing. There's a lot of ways that we can continue to grow. We're really young in our industry, and being able to ask those questions helps me to be a better part of the community, but also helps me to serve that community better. And so that's what I get to do for work. But before I even started that job, I had been asking questions and asking people how they got there. And I guess I didn't totally intend to set out writing this book. But it came together that way. I had notes to myself from the tour as I had kind of these stories in my head from other people. And then I got into an MFA program at Goucher, which was something that was just on my bucket list. We were in a transition, in a move. It was actually, like I said, right before I got my current job. I had been on tour. My husband and I had been living overseas for a little bit, sort of through that. It was just a transition. I wasn't sure what exactly was next. I knew I was probably done being on tour. So I wasn't sure what would come next. So when I got into the MFA program, had to start working on some different projects. And so I started writing some of these stories down that I had been hearing. And people seemed to enjoy reading them in my groups or being intrigued by them as much as I had been intrigued by them. So then I started more intentionally seeking people out and saying like, hey, like, can we talk about why you do this? Can we talk about what got you into this? And can I take a try at writing this? And it, to me, was harmless in that first guise of like, I'm doing this for school program and, we are in the same community and I'm learning about my community. And that did help me in work also. But I did just genuinely enjoy being able to hear some of these, like, it really are some of the most interesting stories that I've been able to hear. And I feel fortunate for them.
How would you, without giving away one of the stories, how would you describe some of the stories that are in the book? I mean, are they stories that are more interesting for people who are in the business or in the theater business from the creative point of view? Are there stories like when people hear about stories about touring, they want to hear party stories?
There are a few party stories. There are. I try to balance it nicely. So, it actually goes through the arc of like a show day, a typical show day. So the book starts as one show ends and you kind of see a quick view of the loadout. And then as the day builds towards the next show, you get a different snapshot from someone in different roles or specialties around the tour. So you hear from the lighting crew chief, and you hear from the front of house engineer for audio, and you hear from the backline person setting up the drum set at different stages through the day. And I did try to give a good mix of the people I feel like I know in this industry, where it's one person's story, but it usually is representative of more than that too.
Sure.
These are people's real stories. I think I changed like 2 names or 3, like, so every person knows they were in here. You know, I wanted to be careful. I work with everybody still, but you know, sharing these stories. But that's really what the push of continuing to kind of change it from that thesis to a book is. I appreciated that some of the people I was talking to over the course of, it took 6.5 years from when I first started it. But over that time would check back in, and I could tell valued the fact that their story was being told.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot written about this industry yet. And I appreciated being able to share those, because I am still, I've been doing this for about 13 years now professionally. This is not my story to tell. I have a story to tell within this.
Yeah.
You know, this is my industry that I work within, but a show can't happen without all these different parts. And so I don't think you can talk about what we do without talking about, you know, there are people who love this passionately. There are people who maybe are done with it and, you know, and transitioning out. And there are elements I would hope that resonate with everybody, not just those who work in this. But I guess I did take extra care to try to write this in a way that someone who does work in this would agree with how it was presented. You know,
well represented. Well, when you have, let's say, a really big tour, what's probably the single biggest challenge? And let's take kind of COVID out of the situation. I know that's been
appreciate
horrible.
that. Yeah, it's a unique challenge in itself. You know, it's interesting if you look over, you know, not just contemporary, but like theater and that stuff, recessions, wartime, people still go to see their entertainment. People still come to shows. You know, I kind of joke people might spend their last dollar to go to be entertained.
Sure.
And it's something that you see time and time again. This is sort of a unique experience this year, in these last couple of years, where it is just not safe to gather together, which makes it a unique challenge. But in a typical year, right? I would say some of the unique challenges, first of all, for any tour. I mean, a tour might range. My first tour, when I was with the Black Eyed Peas, we had about 100 people, 120 people with drivers traveling with us regularly.
Yeah.
So keeping the communication, I was working on the production team. So part of my job was keeping the communication open between the departments, making sure people had what they needed, food, times, travel, different kind of things that way. I toured with Leonard Skinnard for 2.5 years, and I was number 13 on that crew. So it was a much smaller crew, and just a much different pace. There were different challenges because there were less people, and there were certain things that were so much easier.
Yeah.
So big or small, collectively, I would say finding a way for your team to understand its mix would probably be the most essential part in a successful tour is, you know, how we work together. Not everyone has to be best friends, but you do work very long hours very closely with each other, right? So there has to be a way that everyone can communicate and get what they need from one another. Because, you know, if you can't show up and just see the speakers, right? You can't show up and just see the stage. So all these different pieces have to talk to each other for the show to happen.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions? I know a lot of people kind of imagine roadies to be, you know, kind of like traveling with the circus. those types of, and it's really
It's a
nothing.
little bit like that. I mean, it's not
Sure.
not like that.
Okay, fair enough. What would be some of the biggest misconceptions, I should say?
um, it is, there is a certain craziness to just like in the feeling of the, say like the circus of, moving different city, you do become this own community within itself on tour, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, I think one of the biggest misconceptions might be like, oh my gosh, you've been everywhere. Like you've traveled so much.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's true. We do get to travel a lot, but based on the pacing of the show, the inside of an arena looks pretty much the same pretty much
Sure.
anywhere you go. And so I can't say it's a misconception because we do have days off and we've got, we get to see a lot of amazing places and get some cool experiences through this type
Mm-hmm.
of work. But it's still work, and I think
Sure.
that that's something that collectively we all say is like, our passports or our stage passes don't reflect vacation time, right?
Yes.
So that is one part, but you do, you're able to get into things, whether you're touring around the world or whether you're just touring, in your community, you get to see a lot of different places and people
Sure.
coming together. I would also say kind of something that this industry is growing out of is that sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
There is certainly a freedom to this industry that I think will always be here. The freedom in the sense of you can come in and be whoever you are if you're coming in and getting your job done and being a part of this. And I think that's appealing to some people, right? You don't have to dress a certain way or watch your mouth in any way.
Sure.
You can just come in and be totally who you are. But the shows have grown and the technology has grown and the stakes, and you mentioned the liability, is higher. And so collectively as an industry, we have more to take seriously, right?
Yes.
We're getting better training. We're trying to be more organized in how we can support our teams and support the routing. And, we still get to have fun. We still have our days off. But when we're there for a show, right, we're there to be able to build it and make sure that it goes safely.
Mm-hmm.
And that it looks cool. I mean, that's the thing. We all do, I would say, have an investment in wanting to put out a good show.
Absolutely. I mean, that the product is probably the most important thing. You want to make sure that the band looks and sounds good, and the audience gets what they paid for. And a lot of times when people complain about the cost of tickets, I don't know that they really take into account everything that you've just spoken about: the travel, the room and board, the insurance, the equipment, the
How
training for all
much?
the people.
Yeah.
These people just don't walk off the street and know how to do all these things. The lighting is very expensive. So
The gear, the equipment, I mean, there's so much more to it than you would typically expect.
yeah.
You like the evolution of things. I would share the concept of this perfect show has also evolved in recent
Mm-hmm.
years, right? You used to do a show in Chicago, and maybe you'd hear about it in Philly,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
if you had a friend who you knew was also going and you called and talked to them, or if something happened and you saw it in a newspaper, or like now it used to be that each show was sort of independent to that show.
Yeah.
But with the way social media and YouTube and video and everything is now, the reality is once opening night hits, the image of that show, the ideas of that show, the elements of that show are out there.
Yeah.
They're out there for everyone. And so the shift has sort of been each show becomes trying to match that as
Yes.
closely as
Interesting.
possible.
Yeah.
Not every building's designed the same. So maybe not every building has space for all the elements, or
Sure.
maybe there's some weird support beams that change the way you have to make that dragon move, but now once it opens in Chicago, when you show up in Philly, you expect to see that dragon and it's going to come over the audience and you're ready for it. You're ready to take your pictures of it. So it becomes more of a challenge of needing to create that perfect image and that perfect show seamlessly every night.
Yeah.
And
I heard, I believe it was Glenn Fry one time talking about the Eagles when they were on tour. There was a really good documentary out a couple of years ago, and they were talking about the band and how they traveled and so on and so forth. And one of the things I heard him say, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "You never know. There might be one person out there who this is their first time seeing you, and that it just never worked out for them before their schedule or where you traveled on a particular tour. And this might be the only time that that person who has followed you for years has seen you live. And you want to make sure that that person has a good experience." And I was really, obviously I had a lot of respect for the Eagles as musicians, but
yeah.
I don't know that today some of the artists take those fans that seriously. They kind of feel that it's just another show.
It's
And
funny, the artists in our world, like you'd think, I do have some interaction with artists, not closely,
yeah,
but around, and obviously they bring the people in, right? But in
sure.
our immediate tech world, in our immediate backstage world, right? The artist feels like it plays sort of a minor role a lot of times.
Hmm.
To me, a mark of someone that, because I get to see rehearsals currently more than I get to see shows, but for me, that's the mark. It's like if someone shows up to their own rehearsal, which you don't always have to, because really the gear takes more choreographing
Sure.
than the artists themselves sometimes. But for me, and maybe it was growing up the way I did, being able to perform and stuff, there are
Hmm.
people, hundreds and thousands of people around the world,
Hmm.
so much more than that, rehearsing in their bedrooms and in their basements for the chance to be able to do a big show like this.
Sure.
And so for me, I always appreciate, like, if an artist does show up and take into account what's being built around them and for them,
Hmm.
because not everyone does. You're right.
Yeah.
But I think it's the ones, for me, it's like I can tell if you're showing up at rehearsals, if you're checking in on your crew,
Yeah.
if you're not overly involved, but if you're paying attention to the gear you're going to have to safely maneuver around,
Hmm.
it shows me that you're invested, right? It's usually
Yeah.
the artists who are paying attention to show times and start times, which is respectful of the audience, right? It's usually also the artists who are, quicker to do
Yeah.
personal moments for their fans. And
Yeah.
you're
Well,
right,
that's
it's not everywhere anymore. It's not like a guaranteed, but it's still there, if
yeah.
in the right scenario.
And in the rock and roll world, I've heard horror stories about a lot of different bands one time or another being so wasted that they couldn't play and things like that. And by and large, I believe now, like you're talking about, more recent years, that hasn't happened too often. But it has happened.
It has.
And there's that's the thing I think for me anyway. It's the same with actors. Actors a lot of times when they become so famous, they start to just do these walkthrough roles, and they just expect the audience to show up just simply because they're in the movie or they're in the TV show.
Mm.
And for me, the actors that have had the best longevity are people who put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in making sure that there's something on the screen that's worthwhile for somebody to take a day and set it aside and go somewhere and sit in a room and watch it.
Exactly. It's a big investment, right?
Yeah,
I know that if you mentioned I have 3 young kids. You hear the dog, you hear the kids. It's just,
yeah,
welcome
sure,
COVID pandemic life. We just all are on top of each other all the time. But like,
sure,
if I wanted to go to a concert right now, right? It's sourcing a babysitter. It's planning that out in advance, right? You're not
hmm,
only buying the ticket, and you're making a night of it. You're doing
sure,
you're not going for just the one thing. You're making a whole experience of it. Um, sometimes people get cars, they get with their friends. You've got several groups of people taking off
sure,
work or, spending this kind of money in advance for an experience, right?
hmm,
For something that they're going to appreciate and remember and that they're going to be able to really enjoy. And that's like,
yeah,
what an honor, like
yes,
and you have to be able to take that seriously because
sure,
you only get so many nights out. You only get, so much, free
Exactly.
cash to spend. You only get so much time to be able to do that kind of stuff,
Yep.
and you want to make it worthwhile.
Uh,
And we kind of joke collectively, on our worst day, you do have to keep it seriously, right? Like there are safety issues, always precaution,
Sure.
right? But on our worst day, right, it's a concert. I kind of joke, like it's not
Yeah.
brain surgery. It's not usually a life
Absolutely.
or death moment.
Correct.
It's not, okay, are you going to see the dragon fly all the way in, or can I only fly part way in, right?
Yeah.
But
Sure.
that's something that people work really hard to try to provide us
Yeah.
this thorough experience.
Yeah. I
And at
believe.
the end of the day, it's, it is important, right?
Sure.
Like,
And technology has raised the expectations of what the audience wants. And there's no doubt about that. And we could get into a whole discussion about whether or not technology is now part of the same with the movies. The movies, quite frankly, the last number of years, they look like really, to me, like really good high-tech video games because they're so CGI'd and everything.
you know what? I just with my sister, we watched the old school Ninja Turtles, right? With like the puppets.
Yeah.
And this whole conversation, like they would literally never make a movie like that right now. It
Yeah.
would all be computer generated. And how much do you miss out? I
Yes.
want a good puppet. Like I want like an action movie with a set, like with like
Yeah.
weird ooze that you can tell isn't actually ooze, but like they're trying. Like
Yeah.
I think I would prefer that to seeing it come out of a computer, like it
Yes.
always does. They all
Yes.
look the same.
Yes, I have a couple of friends in that do film. A couple of my friends that are podcasters actually, talk to filmmakers and all that, and that's an ongoing discussion. When does it become too much? But anyway, getting back to your book, the book is called Tour Book, and is your full name listed as the author if people search it out?
Yep, Rachel
Okay.
Pfennig Hales, or just Rachel Hales. If you want to, if you think this sort of thing is interesting, like I do, and I claim I'm a big nerd. I love this kind of idea of knowing how these pieces come together and getting a
Yep.
peek behind the curtain and understanding what's on the tour bus.
With that being said, what would be the best compliment that someone would give you about the book?
It depends on whether or not you work in the live event industry.
Okay.
Um,
Somebody who picked it up out of curiosity.
Yeah, I think the best compliment I could hear would be, wow, I had no idea all those people were involved. I can't
Yeah.
wait to go see my next show.
Yeah.
And see. Because I do think there's just so much unknown, but there are also some juicy stories in here if you are searching for like the fun backstage. There are plenty of those in there for sure.
Okay.
But for those people who work in it, I think I was actually most nervous, terrified, excited, scared. This is a pretty, we exist backstage. This is a community of crew. We dress in black. We're not supposed to be seen. It's supposed to be about the show. So shining a light back here, I think people get nervous sometimes when too much is shared about our community. And I was really committed to trying to do that in a way that felt authentic, that someone could feel this and say, hey, what we do isn't perfect.
Right.
I had some people read this being like, that was fascinating. I would never, ever do that job. Right.
Yeah.
And you get some people who read it and they're like, wow, like sign me up. Where is it? Like, how do I do it? But for those of us who already do it, I think we can all say there's good parts and bad parts to it.
Well, that's,
but you take the good and the bad, and
it's that way. You have to be committed to your art, and with anything, you have to take the good with the bad. I mean, that's part of it. But the one thing I find intriguing for any music fan, even if you're just a casual music fan, most people like music on some level. They're not necessarily going out and buying big hi-fi systems. And now there I'm showing my age. Hi-fi system. And that's another topic too. The way people listen to music has really changed, and
really changed.
And maybe on another podcast we can talk about some of that. One of the things that I found interesting is the social aspect of music is totally gone now. For example, in the golden era of the rock era, when Pink Floyd or a band like that came out, you had people over, you spent a lot of time setting up your speakers, and you got the hors d'oeuvres and the drinks and all this, and you had a discussion about the music you were listening to.
Sounds
Now,
fun. Yeah.
yeah, now everybody is in their own little world. They got their phone and things in their ears, and I don't really care about what you're listening to. I don't like it. I'm listening to what I like, and we could go on and on about this.
Yeah. I could talk to you a whole nother episode about that. That's interesting to
The
me.
next time we might have to do that. So people can find your book online, I presume, Amazon.
They can on Amazon. If you happen to be around Lidditz, Pennsylvania, where there's the main hub for this kind of stuff, it's at a few bookstores in Pennsylvania and at a few schools. But Amazon's where most people will find it. So
awesome, and it's called a Tour Book, and the name again for the author is Rachel Pfennig Hales. Do I have that correct?
Yep, Hales.
All right. Where can people find out more about you, social media, websites, anything like that?
Yeah, collectively, I'm at Pfennig Hales, so RAPFENHALES, and that's on all the socials. And basically, this is my jam. I talk about live events and supporting the arts. I occasionally throw in some ridiculous stories about my 3 beautifully crazy, ridiculous kids. But for the most part, it's all about the live event industry, and it's about the community that we get to exist in.
Yeah, that's awesome. For anybody out there who is a creator, obviously a music lover would, I'm guessing, be more in tune to this. But anybody who ever wants to appreciate something, a lot of times you can check out a painting, you can check out a movie, you can check out some other things, and you may enjoy it. But when you know more about what went into it, what went into creating it, and like you said, the next time you go to a concert, when you realize how many people it took to create that on so many different levels, whether it be the sound, the lighting, and that's obviously what people notice, but there's so much more in terms of how all those people were managed on the trip, and financing it and getting sponsors and branding it and promoting it. I mean,
look up in the ceiling. I swear, next time you're there, you just have to look up in the ceiling, because you almost never do. But it's you can just see how much of different parts come together. The visual is, I'm a nerd. I told you, Billy. Yes, I warned you.
That's okay.
I think it's beautiful. And so you got to check it out.
Absolutely. It'll give you a much greater appreciation for what happens at those events. Thank you very much, Rachel, for being here. You certainly, your energy and your enthusiasm for what you do and the theater and the whole show part of what you do is so much written in you. It's in your smile, it's in your words, and that's very, that alone, people like to listen to that. So thank you very much for being on.
I do genuinely love it, and I appreciate being able to talk about it with you. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Rachel. Once again, talking to Rachel Pfennig Hales, and the book is called Tour Book. And you can simply do a search on Amazon. Covers a lot of little details and some behind the scenes information about how some of your favorite tours are being put together. My name is Billy Dees. You can find me on Twitter. That's kind of like my social media home, I guess. And you don't necessarily have to have a Twitter account to check out the page to interact with it. You do. And of course, you can tweet me at any time. There is several links in my bio on Twitter that will send you other places. You can find the podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, on down the line. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast today, and we will talk to you again next week.